to introduce Claudia. Claudia, she's from Uruguay, and she's an agile enthusiast with over 12 years of experience in software testing. She's really, really passionate about building and fostering a whole team approach toward testing and quality. By the way, Claudia, you can start sharing your screen whenever you're ready.
Okay.
One of the cool things about Claudia is that she also is involved on the testing community. She is organizing meetups, and she's on the Testing UI conference, that's Testing Uruguay conference. And she's presenting in all sorts of additional conferences all over the world, and that's pretty impressive. And again, always something to commend. She has a computers engineering degree, and in her spare time, she actually enjoys traveling. So Claudia, I will let you take it from here. While I remind everyone, if you want to ask questions, go ahead. The best way is to use the Slack channel. And if you prefer, then you can use the Q&A of Zoom as well. But Claudia, take it from here.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it perfectly.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. This presentation is about adopting testing as part of the team culture. First of all, I will introduce myself. I am Claudia, and I am from Uruguay. I have a computer engineer degree, as Joel mentioned, more than 12 years of experience in software testing. I'm very active in the Uruguayan testing community, where I organize testing conferences as well as meetup, and I really enjoy traveling and blogging about my trips. So let's start. First, I will set the context of this story. Then I will share 7 lessons that my team learned during this journey about adopting testing as part of the team culture. These lessons could be seen as recommendations if you are starting to adopt testing as a team responsibility, or if you are already in this context, I hope you can take new ideas to enhance the testing in your team. I work in a cross-functional team, fully dedicated to building the product under test. The team is composed by developers, visual designers, interaction designers, and testers. And from a testing perspective, testing is performed by most of us, not only by the tester, me. The product under test has been in the market since 2012, and since then we have had several major releases and updates. The product has a desktop version which runs in Windows and Mac, and we also have a cloud version supported in several browsers and devices. I do like this graphic representation by Katrina about which roles are involved in testing according to different methodologies and frameworks. She defines testing as a collaborative activity and a shared responsibility. From my point of view, when you start adopting testing as part of the team responsibility, no matter if your context is agile or DevOps, one of the challenges that the team may face is the challenge of the how. How do we start? How we do it? How do we do it? Another challenge from my point of view is which skills do we need? We want to take the best of the different areas of expertise that we have in our team, but it's also important to identify which other skills we need to incorporate as a team. Now I will share with you 7 challenges and lessons learned in my team during this journey, and some of the actions that we have taken to tackle those challenges. Yeah? So let's start with the first one. The first one is about building a common understanding about testing. Regardless of the testing strategies that you apply from a manual or automation testing perspective, I think it's really important to build a common understanding about testing in your team in order to communicate properly and to understand the implication of testing. For example, to understand the coverage of your test, to understand what is being left out of the scope, and so on. In my team, we have done a lot of actions around this. For example, we have a lot of internal trainings. For example, at the beginning, we did internal trainings about functional testing in general. Nowadays, we do specific internal trainings depending on the testing strategy that we want to incorporate or adapt as a team. For example, we did internal trainings about exploratory testing and heuristics. We also have incorporated, for example, kickoff testing meetings with the whole team when the testing strategy is defined for the next release. For each feature, what we do, the tester does, is to present the testing activities to be performed by the team and other testing tasks that should be done by the team regardless of the feature releases. For example, verifying the installers. We also incorporate follow-up testing meetings with the whole team too. And the main goal of this weekly meeting is to make sure the team is on the same page regarding the progress for the release. We also adjust the testing strategy according to the status of the features from the development perspective. And we also incorporate an early testing as an activity to help features mature while they are still being developed. This activity is very important for us and is performed before the feature is ready to test, and it's applied for complex features to have the testing input while it's being developed. We have an internal documentation repository. Here there is a snapshot of it, where all information around development, product guidance, customer support, testing, and more is included. And regarding testing, we have general information where each team member can find any information about testing. For example, information about our bugs workflow, about our mind maps, our test bed, our testing environment and users, automation solution, etc. Everyone in the team can add or edit content in this repository, and having a centralized repository helps us sharing knowledge in the team, as well as promoting a culture of sharing. The second lesson that I want to share with you today is about adapting your testing strategies as a team approach. I will share very briefly 2 testing strategy examples. The first one is checklist to support exploratory testing, and this one is one of our first approaches as a team, and it helped us mature from a testing perspective, and we applied it for almost 2 years. Checklists were used as an input to test feature when doing exploratory testing by the team. Each checklist was an Excel document, and we had one per each feature or module being tested. Those checklists were elaborated by both the tester and the developers involved in the feature. And those checklists include the test ideas and variables to cover. It was not a detailed step-by-step scenarios guide. It just includes the test ideas when testing a certain feature. It also includes the kind of errors we were looking for, the solution risk from the development perspective, and also the known issues and decisions while developing the feature being tested. Mainly, the main advantages of applying this approach were 3 things. They help us to reuse our ideas, so we can avoid rethinking test ideas and conditions and variables from scratch. Also, writing the checklist with the feature developer help identify testing variables and ideas from inside the code that sometimes are hard to identify from a black box strategy. And also, through the checklist, the testing variables and ideas to cover were explicitly shared by the team. On the other hand, it was really difficult to represent the test variables and ideas through different features. So what we did is to incorporate a new testing strategy which kept the current advantages that we already have at that moment, but also wanted a new one which mitigates its disadvantages. So we have started using mind maps instead of checklists. This testing strategy is the one that we apply today when doing exploratory testing in my team. So in our context, we build a mind map for each feature. A mind map includes the test conditions, ideas, and variables to cover a feature from the testing perspective. Mind maps help us having a common understanding of what to test. And through the mind maps, we can easily represent the dependencies between the different test variables and features. Here, we can see a full mind map, which includes the test ideas and variables for a feature of our product. I'm not expecting you to see it in detail. I just wanted to share it in order to see the structure and size. We defined a nomenclature and guidelines on how to design our mind maps in the team. The colors, for example, have their semantic as well as the floating nodes on top, but we are not going to see them in detail because of time restriction. What I want to share with you today is that having this nomenclature and guidelines help us focus on identifying the variables and test ideas and know how to represent them. We use mind maps as a reference for exploratory testing sessions. This means that we use mind maps as an input when testing a feature. Mind maps guide us in thinking what to cover from a testing perspective. Remember that each mind maps includes the test ideas and variable we may consider when testing a certain feature. Through the different testing cycles, we reuse mind maps, so we don't have to rethink test ideas, conditions, and variables every time. And also, we have as a criteria that we extend or update our feature mind maps to reflect changes in the product or when the team member tests a feature, and for example, identifies new test ideas or variables which were not included in the feature mind map before. So it's the mind maps are alive through the different life cycles. I invite you all to see this webinar that I did in the Agile Testing Day Monday channel last year. In this webinar, I shared the nomenclature that I mentioned before, and I also share an example of a mind map for a feature in the product I work on. What I want to share today that is really important from my point of view when you are testing in a team, that testing is a shared responsibility and it is a cross-functional team, is that all our strategy have the following things in common. We have a repository with a defined folder hierarchy and file naming conventions. We also have guidelines and nomenclature conventions when it's applied. We also have a proactive attitude to update and extend the testing artifact according to the tester feature changes. And we also have a guardian of the strategy. For the strategies that we have seen, I am the guardian, but we also have other testing strategies as a team where other team members are the guardian of them. And the main idea of this is that someone is evangelizing the approach in the team, evaluating if it still applies, or we need to adjust it according to the team matures in time or the feature evolves in time. Also, when starting to apply a new approach or we start adapting a current testing strategy, what we try to do always is to work collaboratively, validating and brainstorming, because as we have different areas of expertise and strengths, we can enrich our strategy. Remember that I work in a cross-functional team with developers and also visual designers and interaction designers. Also, when we start applying these strategies as a team, we gain, for example, a deeper understanding of the testing effort required for a release. We also gained a deeper understanding of the impact that a fix has from the testing effort perspective. For example, we have improved the triage for our bugs. We also improve our knowledge of the product beyond our specific activities. And as everyone in the team tests and reports bugs, the bug tracker workflow has been improved too. For example, we added a risk field to our bug template in the track system we use for bugs. This field is set by the developer when setting the bug as fixed, and this field indicates from the developer perspective how risky the fix is. And this setting is used as an input when doing regression testing in order to have more information about how much effort may be spent during the regression. We have incorporated other improvements in our bug workflow, but I want to share at least one, and I think this risk field is very representative about how we collaborate between the different areas in the team. So the next lesson the next lesson learned that I want to share with you today is about building a common understanding about the criteria of done. From my point of view, it's important to have a clear criteria of done in the team in order to mature features from the development perspective, and also to have a shared trust level of how well the feature behaves according to what has been defined. It helps us understand coverage too. So at first, we try to have the same criteria of done for all features and changes in our code, and we defined gate guardians in the team from the different aspects to consider. For example, the visual designer verified that the visual design implementation corresponds to the defined one, and the technical writer checked that the defined texts are correctly. The tester, me in this case, checked that mind maps, testbed, exploratory testing sessions were done, and also automation checks were implemented at the different levels in the solution. Currently, our criteria of done depends on the complexity of the feature, on the risk of the solution, and on the business value that the feature or fix has. And this is mainly because we wanted to optimize our time, resources, and strategies. We kept the idea of verifying the different aspects for a feature or fix. So what we do is, before starting to work with a feature or a fix from the development perspective, we define if we are going to have, for example, code reviews, early testing activities, mind maps and testbed elaboration, exploratory testing and regression testing activities, automation checks, and at which level, and so on. And for the aspect that we consider necessary to cover the feature or fix, what we do is to create tasks in our board. So all team members involved in the feature or fix knows which tasks are necessary to cover it in order to consider it to be done. We are, to be honest, we are not at an ideal scenario for all aspects. For example, there is room to improve a lot on our automation strategies and effort, but automation is always part of our conversation. And I think that having an explicit conversation around criteria of done helps mature the testing strategies in the team as a team approach. So for example, as a consequence, we also improve our criteria of ready to test, because we try to get feature mature before being ready to test, and this is important to optimize time and reduce iterations between development and testing. We put a lot of effort in code reviews and automation checks from the API level. The tester, me, the developers who collaborate in testing, focus both on coverage and on finding deeper problems instead of focusing their attention in superficial issues when the feature or the fix is ready to test. So we get a really mature feature when we start applying a black box strategy, for example. So our fourth lesson learned is to adapt your process to fit your needs. At first, we adopted a Scrum, which helps us incorporate a framework of good practices and guidelines to improve the way we were working in. But after a while, we started to modify our process as we mature as a team, and we became more critical about the way we worked. For example, what did we adapt? We adapt a lot of things, but today I will share one of them. For example, we stopped doing daily stand-up meetings, and instead we have weekly meetings. During this meeting, each team member mentions that what they are working on, what comes next, and if there is any impediment to perform their task. And we stopped doing daily stand-up meetings because most of the time there wasn't much to say from one day to the next, and we started to get bored. So as we understand the importance and value of the daily stand-up meeting, we started to have the meeting on a weekly basis. And for us, has been a very good change, because we take the best in that time and everyone is really focused in that meeting. Besides, during this meeting, any team member can bring up any topic that they consider relevant to talk as a team. For example, at some point, we incorporated design meetings. That was another type of meetings that we incorporated at some point. Most of the time, depending on the complexity of the feature to add or extend, we have a prototype designed by the interaction designer. So these meetings were an instance to discuss the prototype with all team members involved in the feature as a start point before developing. Currently, we are not having this type of meetings anymore because we have incorporated as part of our culture. So having prototypes, analyzing them before starting to work. We comment on the prototype directly, or we use Teams, which is a tool very similar to Slack. Our interaction designer is in the US and the rest of the team is in Uruguay. So this way of iterating over the prototype to mature the feature before developing, it helps us a lot to start developing with a very clear idea of what we want to reach. What I want to highlight is that it's really important from my point of view that the team owns the process. So you can incorporate or remove activities, meetings, according to what the team needs. And it's really important to remember, because those needs can change or evolve with time. So we need to be really open-minded to identify those type of things in our life cycle. So our fifth lesson learned was that testing is a team responsibility. My personal lesson learned about this are a lot, but I want to share two today, is that one of them is not be afraid of changes, although sometimes transitions are a little bit hard. And also another lesson learned from my point of view was to be open-minded to adapt your role, and to collaborate, also to build bridges in your team to reach a common understanding and engagement about testing. My advice here is to start doing a small experiment, and you will fail, but you will learn, and then you will start again. But the important thing is to get started. So besides performing testing activities, support manual and automated testing, the tester, me, defines, follows up, and adjusts the testing strategies to be applied by the team, shares and evangelizes their knowledge of testing with the team, and also tries to consolidate the project goals and constraints and the quality goals. And also does trainings in the team. We do a lot of training, and it's really important. During this journey, we have learned that it's important be flexible enough to adapt and wear other hats depending on the needs of the product and the team. And I think this lesson is beyond testing. For example, in our case, we also in our case, customer support is a team responsibility too. All of us are involved in customer support. The other lesson that I want to share with you today is the importance of nourishing, sorry, it's hard for me to pronounce, nourishing your team culture. I think changes are a fact, so our teams need to have the tools to adapt to them. It's important to create the right environment to drive changes. Soft skills are more important than in the past. From my point of view, these values and practices are needed to build a team culture. And I would like to highlight respect to drive any change, because changes are hard and we have to set the right conditions to drive them. So I encourage you also to promote activities to share knowledge across disciplines in your team and enjoy learning beyond your expertise. And the last lesson that I want to share with you today is about getting support from management. In my experience, most changes and improvements are driving in a bottom-up direction. So it's really, really important to have the autonomy to try new strategies, but I think it's also very important to have management support when trying new ideas to enhance the team strategies and methodologies. Because otherwise, from my point of view, it's very hard to allocate time and resources consistently. My lesson learned about this during these years is that it's really important to share the whys, because the whys add context and help to communicate. So I think it's also really important to make sure to pick the correct time to share your thoughts in order to be effective. And of course, sometimes we have to be patient about it. But I think it's really important to share the whys and to pick the right moment to try to introduce changes in your team and culture. So, what happened here? Okay, yeah. So, just to wrap up the presentation, I think I spoke very fast. My last advice, and to wrap up the talk, is to keep calm and enhance your testing culture. So thanks very much for your time and for the organization for having me. I don't know if you have any questions.
First of all, thanks for the talk. I think that what I like about it was that it was very down to earth, and it's very easy to take your lessons and try to apply them.
Thank you.
To people who are doing that. I do have a couple questions that came there, and obviously if additional people will ask, it will be great.
Okay.
My question here, and you mentioned it maybe on the sidelines a couple of times, were all of your development willing to run tests?
Yeah.
Because most of the times where we try to tell developers, hey, you need to go ahead and run tests, even though they say they might, then they always have excuses why they are not going to run tests. So the question is, if you run into stuff like that in your experience, and if yes, how did you contrast it?
Well, in my case, in my team, we have been working together mostly since 2011, because the product is in the market since 2012. And during this year, we have matured a lot around at having a testing culture in the team. But at when at the beginning, when testing was only performed by me, but at some point the product has started to grow in features and complexity, and my conversation with the team was that I am only one person and they are more people in the team, so no one can expect that I can produce what, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 people produce. So if we want to have a product to feel proud of about its quality and how it works, that responsibility cannot be for only one person or one type of role in the team. So the conversation started from my side to try to make aware the team about the effort that we need from the testing perspective to cover the product, and also how much effort it takes and how, as a team, we can do different things to cover it. So, for example, when we started at the beginning, we started applying checklists, and when doing those checklists, I involved the developers, so they were involved in thinking the variables, and then when testing from the manual perspective, other developers started to use the checklist. So we started to do cross-testing, so they started to learn about the different features. And what happened there was that they started to learn from features that were not the ones that they developed, but they were really dependent from the ones that they did. So in that sense, they started to learn more in depth the product, so they also started to see the value from developing too. And then, for example, when we started to automate some backend API and services, what we did was I defined the test architecture, and mostly I designed the scenarios to automate but the rest of the team automate those scenarios. And the conversation around that to take them on board was that, okay, if we want to have more cadency or feel to have confidence on doing changes frequently, we need another strategy beside doing regression testing and exploratory testing. So we started to automate because of that. But I think the key from my experience is to talk and be honest about the expectations that you have and what you can do and what you can do all together.
Okay, sounds like a good point. I see it. I think that you were lucky in a sense, but cool. That's great that you were able to support that. By the way, a lot of people have asked on the channel, what tool do you use for a mind map? I don't think that it's very relevant. I think that there are plenty of tools, but people do want to know, what are you using for that?
Well, we use Xmind, and we use the free version of it. And it's a paid tool, but we use the free version, and using the free version is okay for us. Yes, and we have been using it for several years, so yeah, and we have very huge mind maps and very linked between them. And at the moment that we evaluated the different mind maps tools, we came up with this one because it was a desktop, not a cloud solution, and also because it was very easy to connect mind maps between them.
Okay, sounds cool. By the way, regarding mind maps, do you update them while you're running the test? Because one of the things that it sounds like you're trying to run exploratory sessions with the help of this checklist, and then you switch over to mind maps. But
yeah,
part of the things with exploratory testing sessions is that you don't really know what you're going to test. So you do want to, whenever you're deviating from what you were testing, then you want to also document that. So how do you do it?
Well, what we do is instead of tracking the sessions, what we do is keep alive the mind map during time. So for example, imagine that we have to test for the first time a feature. So what we do there is to identify all the testing variables, conditions, and ideas that I think that I need to cover the feature. And I will improve that set of ideas and conditions with the developers which were involved developing the feature. So first we have an instance to design the mind map and to think those ideas, and then me or someone else in the team will take as an input that mind maps, and and that person will explore the feature according to those ideas. The person who is performing the sessions, the exploratory sessions, is not going to edit the mind map to set which path were covered or not, because what we do it differently. I will say it later, but what that person does is to cover those variables from there, and if that person identify variables that person consider that are important to cover the feature or are not included in the mind map, what that person will do is to include them in the mind map. So the next time that we have to do regression testing, we will have the test ideas that were thought at the beginning, and then the ideas that were identified also during regression. So for example, when we have to do regression testing, we have a new version of the product. Instead of running all the mind maps for the feature, what we do is two things. First of all, what we do is to identify all features that are impact or had dependencies regarding the changes that were made and we want to test. So what we do there is say, okay, those are the mind maps that we will use, because we have one mind map per feature. So we said, okay, we have to use mind map A, B, and C. And for those mind map, we will have to test and set focus on this part of the mind map, and especially to these variables, because are the ones that are impact with the change or fix. So this way of splitting work is not structured and registered in the mind map. What we do, we have a board with our task. So we have an exploratory testing activity in our board, as a task, and we include in that task which mind maps are needs to cover, and also in which environment, because sometimes we have to test it, I don't know, as it's a cloud version, we have to test it in Safari or with an Internet Explorer. So all that prioritization is done outside the mind map by the tester, but the execution is done by everyone. I don't know if I could explain myself, but please ask.
I think that you did manage to pass that along. And again, I think that you're bringing a lot of very, very practical concepts that might be used.
Thank you.
And my last question before we actually go on a break, because I think that you also need a short break.
Okay.
Let's say you have a tester who's being tasked, his organization say, hey, you know what, do something very similar to what Claudia was asked to do. We're going to switch over to functional teams. You're going to be the sole tester in the team. What would be, in hindsight, after you learned all your lessons, what would be the very first thing that you would recommend to this tester to do in order to start working on this? What would be like in your recipe book? Start from doing this, because it's the most important thing at the beginning.
Yeah, I think from my experience, I think is communication. I think you need to understand. I think you need to know in depth the domain that you want to test, and assuming that you have the technical skills and knowledge about testing, I think the first step, assuming that you have all that, is that you have to start building bridges between the disciplines. So the way of building bridges between disciplines, in my experience, was talking with the team and explaining what I do as a tester, and what are the main things that we do, and why we do it, and how we do it, and how we want to tackle a strategy together if we want to for example, have a cadency, I don't know, to publish on production every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or during a month. So I think it's dependent on which is the goal that you have from as a team. But I think communication is really important, because once you start communicating and showing the value of doing things together, and also to bring up to the team a different type of mindset, what happened later, at least for me, is that you start to participate in a lot of activities that are beyond testing. For example, when a new feature come up to our product, me as a tester, I am involved from the beginning, because the mindset, the type of questions that we ask are different, or sometimes we focus on different things, so we contribute and give value, a lot of value from the beginning. So I think it's communication, and yeah, I think it's communication.
Sounds good. Excellent. So, Claudia, first of all, thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Por favor.
I think that the session was very, very fruitful. There are additional questions that people are continuing to ask on the Slack channel, so I invite you to go ahead and take part of it. And again, thanks for sharing all your knowledge with us.
Thank you very much for having me, and enjoy the rest of the conference.